Welcome to TH412 Comparative Confessions, session number 6, video 3. Still live from coffee shop downtown Riga, Old Town, at the cafe. I do like the Latvians and the way they name their businesses. They just get right down to business. The name of their coffee shop is Caffeine. So today we're going to be looking at a brief overview of the major ideas we're going to see within the Confession of Dositheus and within Schaff, dealing with Eastern Orthodoxy. Now, this is not an exhaustive list of the themes we're going to see and even discuss with respect to Eastern Orthodoxy. There's just a lot of them. But kind of as in the study guide, some of the major points are going to begin with Cyril Lucar, who was a patriarch who, within the Orthodox Church, who was sympathetic to Calvinism, was sympathetic to Protestantism, and was seen as perhaps, from the view of Orthodoxy, compromising some of the traditions, their sacred traditions, in order to make room for more kind of Protestant ideas. Now, that would be a kind of negative Orthodox view on him. You could say that he was just reading Scripture closely in light of the Gospel and came to realize that perhaps some of the practices and doctrines that had become entrenched within the Orthodox Church were not actually reflective of the tradition they claimed to uphold. So it's very interesting, some of Cyril Lucar's comments when you read him. I think another point here is the view of sacred Scripture. On the one hand, they seem to have a high view of sacred Scripture. At the same time, however, they don't think it's intelligible to the average person. It's very interesting because they use its sacredness and its importance as the warrant for keeping non-trained people from reading it, right? So essentially, the argument is Scripture is so important and so efficacious and such a guiding principle that it's profound and cannot be read by the average person. So that's actually the position that they're going to take. Free will and predestination, this is in there specifically because of the Reformed notion of double predestination. We haven't gotten there yet in our discussion of comparative confessions, but that is one of the doctrines that you'll see within the traditional kind of Reformed double predestination. You're in or you're out. And they're going to reject that double predestination. In some ways, they reject it for the same reasons that Lutherans do, in the sense that it is contrary to how God speaks within the Scriptures. However, they're also going to bring in the notion of free will, which is always problematic because that gets to the notion of sin. When it comes to the will, it's one of those touchstone topics that kind of determines how a lot of other theological topoi are going to be discussed, right? And you see that with the way that they talk about original and actual sin. So they'll talk about baptism removing original sin, but not actually dealing with actual sin. Now, any actual sin committed up to the point of baptism will be taken care of, okay? But you could proceed on from baptism, right, without committing actual sin, but still experiencing all of the consequences of original sin. So, for example, difficulty in work, the struggles of the human body, pain in childbirth. But you could do that without committing actual sins, right? And they're going to talk about marrying the saints with respect to that. So kind of pay attention to the original worship versus actual sin discussion you see. You're also going to run across here in the Confession of Dositheus a very clear statement that it's not by faith alone. Okay, now, their definition of what faith is isn't isn't clear per se, at least not as clear as I would like it. We're going to have to talk about what faith means to them. I think it's not exactly the same as intellectual assent, but they do want to say that faith is necessary, but that faith is there for good works. It'll be an interesting discussion to kind of talk about what exactly within the Confession of Josephus does faith mean. As we discussed this last week, the necessity of bishops is an important part of their understanding of the church. That has to do with how you understand Scripture and their material principle, which is Scripture and sacred tradition. And of course, sacred tradition means the church, and the church means the bishop. So that all goes together. And it is worth noting that they also have 7 sacraments, the same as the Catholic Church. And one of the things I didn't put on here is icons. It's important that you read through their definition of icons so that you can understand how they see those working and whether or not there is something to be gained by that understanding, but also maybe some things to be avoided. So we'll take a look at those things in class.